In today's video, we explore the terrifying line between calculated risk and irreversible tragedy. From a young engineer's fatal fall on the Matterhorn to a freediver's final descent into the depths of the blue hole, each case is a reminder of how quickly control can slip away, even for those who prepare. It was August 13th, 2015. Morning light reached the Matterhorn's sharp outline, washing its eastern face in a dull yellow. The air above Zermatt was cold and still, broken only by the sound of crampons scraping rock. 3 climbers moved steadily along the Hernley Ridge. Ethan Rowe, the only American in the group, was about to make a fatal mistake that would cost him everything. Ethan, 27, was a methodical mechanical engineer from Denver with a quiet intensity. Colleagues described him as meticulous and private, someone who'd taken up alpine climbing to make the abstract physical. Alpine climbing mixes high altitude with technical rope work, where exposed ridges and icy ledges turn routine tasks deadly if safety protocols are briefly ignored. He often said mountaineering was the only time problems had one right answer. After conquering Colorado's 14ers, Colorado's 58 peaks that rise above 14,000 feet, Ethan trained with a regional club, practicing roped travel and ice axe techniques. The Matterhorn represented his first major European peak, a stepping stone toward larger alpine ambitions. He joined a rope team through a Zermatt guide service, paired with 2 experienced German climbers. They planned with caution and precision, but it wouldn't be enough. Their route was the classic Hernley Ridge, exposed but popular. Weather had been unstable all week, but forecasts cleared the night before. The guide warned them to summit by mid-morning to avoid unpredictable winds. They began climbing at 4 a.m., progressing steadily through lower sections. None of them knew one misstep would turn the descent into a recovery. By 8:30 in the morning, they reached the Solvay hut at 13,100 feet. A small shelter perched on a ledge where climbers rest before the final push. Here, Ethan made his fatal decision. Eager to grab water and adjust his pack, he unclipped momentarily from the fixed line. Witnesses from another rope team later said he had stepped just a few feet off the main line, onto a patch of exposed scree, loose, unstable stones coated with a thin layer of overnight ice. His heel likely caught on the shifting rock. He slipped, and without being clipped in, there was nothing to stop him. He dropped fast, first sliding, then tumbling. His body hit one rock shelf, then another with a sharp, unmistakable crack. Limbs flailed as he bounced off the ridge, then disappeared over a 600-foot drop. The other climbers could only watch. Search and rescue was notified immediately by their guide, but steep terrain and rockfall risk delayed recovery. A Swissair Zermatt helicopter located his body the next morning, 1,000 feet below the hut. His helmet and day pack were found tangled in static rope 300 feet from the edge. Ethan had died instantly from blunt force trauma. His remains were flown back to the U.S. and laid to rest in a private funeral near Boulder, attended by family, friends, and a few former climbing partners. His engineering firm posted a brief tribute on their website, noting his discipline and love for the mountains. Authorities later released a statement urging climbers to stay clipped in, even during breaks or photo stops. The reminder specifically highlighted the dangers of unroping at ledges that appear stable but are prone to ice and loose rock. It was May 24, 2016. The morning sun lit the Gulf of Aqaba as calm waves touched the edge of Dahab's blue hole. Julian DeWitt, a 34-year-old welder from Cape Town, stood at the shoreline, tightening his monofin before entry. What began as a routine freedive would end in one of the area's most disturbing deaths. Julian wasn't your typical thrill seeker. Coworkers called him the checklist guy, methodical, precise, never gambling with danger. But freediving had captured his imagination 2 years earlier. Freediving demands athletes descend on a single breath to depths exceeding 200 feet, where nitrogen narcosis clouds judgment and the margin between consciousness and blackout disappears in seconds. He trained religiously on weekends, logging every session, studying technique obsessively. His goal, the blue hole's infamous arch, a 90-foot tunnel starting at 170 feet below the surface. The arch wasn't just challenging, it was deadly. Dozens of divers had died attempting the passage, earning it the nickname Divers Cemetery. Julian knew the risk, but had spent 3 months making careful preparation dives, each meticulously planned and executed. That morning, conditions were perfect. Julian had found a German scuba instructor to act as passive safety, present in the water but not following him down. At 9 a.m., Julian took his final purging breaths, inhaled deeply, and disappeared into the blue. No one realized anything was wrong. Witnesses watched his line cut straight down through the water, clean and steady. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Below, the safety diver spotted Julian entering the arch without issue, but something was off on the way back up. His kicks lost rhythm, his body angled awkwardly, and his arms hung loose. Nitrogen narcosis had likely hit hard, stripping away focus and motor control just as his oxygen reserves were running out. At 130 feet, Julian drifted sideways and went still. The diver reached him fast, grabbing under his arms and kicking hard for the surface. By the time they broke through, over 5 minutes had passed. Julian's face was blue, his chest still. The standby paramedics began CPR immediately on the rocks, but there was no pulse. Within 5 minutes, they declared him dead. His body was repatriated to South Africa 3 days later. His parents held a quiet funeral outside Cape Town, remembering a son who respected the ocean's power but couldn't escape its unforgiving nature. His methodical approach and safety-conscious attitude made the accident particularly sobering. Online forums debated whether the arch should be permanently closed to recreational divers. To this day, it's still open. It was September 4th, 2017. Strong winds cut through the valley below the Trift Glacier, snapping pine branches and rattling the steel suspension cables. Samantha Miles, a 31-year-old civil engineer from Calgary, stood at the entrance of the Trift Bridge, tightening her camera strap. She stepped forward, unaware that one small miscalculation lay ahead. After years designing municipal infrastructure, Samantha had taken a sabbatical to study high-altitude pedestrian bridges across Europe. Her approach was methodical: handwritten notes, film photography, detailed structural analysis. The Trift Bridge, a 560-foot suspension span swaying 300 feet above a glacial ravine, represented the pinnacle of her research. Suspension bridge crossings at extreme altitudes combine engineering marvel with deadly exposure, where wind speeds can exceed 50 miles per hour, and a single misstep means a fall onto jagged rocks with no possibility of survival. That morning, posted warnings clearly stated, winds above 35 miles per hour, crossing not advised. Lodge staff personally cautioned Samantha about dangerous gusts, but she'd crossed similar bridges before and presented her own wind readings, which showed only brief spikes above the limit. Her field notebook recorded wind speeds and bridge tension readings with engineering precision, convincing staff she understood the risks. 2 German hikers followed behind, but chose to wait as conditions worsened. At 11:17 a.m., Samantha began her crossing. The bridge groaned under 40-mile-per-hour winds, swaying violently with each gust. She moved slowly, pausing midway to secure her camera on the handrail for documentation. According to Jonas, she suddenly stiffened and tried to crouch lower as a fierce crosswind struck. The gust hit with devastating force. Samantha lurched sideways, struck the rope railing, and flipped over the edge. Clara watched helplessly as her scream echoed once before vanishing into the gorge below. Her camera bounced across the planks, then followed her into the abyss. Called by the staff, rescue crews arrived within an hour, rappelling into the treacherous ravine. They found Samantha's body on a ledge 200 feet below. The fall had been instantly fatal. The accident devastated the engineering community. Samantha's methodical approach and professional expertise made the tragedy particularly sobering. Swiss authorities closed the bridge for 5 days, reinforcing warning signage but making no structural changes. Her parents held a private service in Banff, where she'd once interned as a student and fallen in love with the mountains. Former colleagues, friends, and classmates gathered quietly, remembering her as precise, driven, and unshakably calm. It was January 30th, 2018. Sulfur-laced air hung over Halema-Uma'u crater as wind moved through the broken volcanic basin. Matthew Chang, a 42-year-old auto mechanic from Honolulu, stood at the viewing platform of Hawaii Volcano's National Park, adjusting his windbreaker against the acrid breeze. He didn't know the rock underfoot was no longer stable. Born and raised on the islands, Matthew had grown up revering the volcanoes that shaped his homeland. Though he never became the park ranger he once aspired to be, he kept that passion alive through solo hiking trips. Friends described him as quiet, thoughtful, and deeply spiritual about nature, someone who avoided crowds and sought authentic experiences others overlooked. That morning, sulfur dioxide levels had prompted rangers to issue verbal advisories at the visitor center. Temporary rope barriers and orange caution signs marked unstable ground near the caldera's rim. Fractured lava plates formed by recent events. The warnings were clear, but Matthew had crossed similar boundaries before during his solo explorations. He'd crossed roped-off trails and ignored warning signs on past hikes, always returning without incident. Just after 10 a.m., 2 German tourists saw Matthew step over a boundary rope. He wore jeans, a light windbreaker, and carried a small flashlight for exploring lava tubes. One of them remembered him smiling and saying he just wanted to get a closer look, really close. Minutes later, the German tourists heard a sharp crack, then saw the ground beneath Matthew split. He pitched forward without a sound, arms flailing as the fractured edge crumbled under his boots. His flashlight flew from his hand and bounced once before vanishing into the vent below. They watched in shock as his body slammed against jagged rock, then dropped out of sight into the dark, 80 feet down. They immediately called for help. Rangers responded within 20 minutes, using thermal scopes to locate the impact site. Matthew had landed among loose boulders coated in volcanic glass. Based on the condition and location, medics concluded he died instantly from multiple blunt force injuries compounded by toxic fume inhalation. His body was recovered that afternoon using specialized winch and litter systems. A funeral service was held 5 days later at a modest church in Hilo. The accident prompted immediate safety improvements. Park officials installed reinforced fencing and enhanced signage along unstable crater sections. It was December 8, 2016. Heat warped the ground across Ethiopia's Dalal hydrothermal field as sulfur-filled air hit 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Marko Halonen, a 36-year-old geothermal surveyor from Helsinki, stood at the edge of a salt dome, checking his temperature sensors one last time. What started as a standard 40-minute calibration would end in one of the worst fatalities in geological fieldwork. A decade of experience exploring volcanic rift zones across Iceland, Indonesia, and the Andes had earned Marko respect for precision and calculated risk-taking. But a week ago, his Helsinki-based energy contractor had sent him to assess geothermal potential in the Danakil Depression, one of Earth's most hostile environments. The research team included French geologist Dr. Aude Lacroix and 2 experienced AFAR guides who knew the terrain's hidden dangers. Despite their warnings about invisible hazards, acid pools masked by thin salt crust, and sudden collapses, Marko insisted on hiking alone across a newly exposed zone to recalibrate ground sensors, confident that his instruments and training could detect risks others missed. That morning, temperatures had already climbed past 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and the mineral surface shimmered in waves of heat distortion. Marko moved deliberately, placing each step with practiced care as he advanced across the brittle salt crust. He paused several times to take readings, brushing away loose sediment to place his sensors directly on the dome's surface. Behind him, faint cracks spidered outward, but he didn't see them, or maybe chose not to register their meaning. The AFAR guides exchanged uneasy glances, calling out once more to warn him, but Marko waved them off, eyes fixed on his tablet. At 10:15 a.m., Dr. Lacroix watched from a nearby rise as Marko stepped onto what appeared to be solid ground. The pale dome looked stable, glittering like ice in the desert heat. Without warning, it fractured catastrophically. Marko's left leg broke through first, then the entire crust collapsed, plunging him into a 6-foot-deep acidic brine pool. The water, thick with sulfuric acid and iron salts, instantly reacted with his exposed skin. His scream echoed across the hellscape as chemical burns began destroying tissue on contact. Dr. Lacroix and a guide rushed forward desperately. She tried reaching him with a tripod, but the pool's edges hissed and crumbled under her weight. Splashback burned her hand and thigh as she leaned in. Marko surfaced briefly, his face already blistered and gasping for air. Seconds later, he slipped beneath the surface, forever. He died within minutes from chemical burns, airway corrosion, and shock. The guides couldn't do anything but call for extraction. The Ethiopian military assisted in the hazardous recovery operation, extracting his remains under strict quarantine protocol before repatriation to Finland. Marco's death triggered immediate industry changes. The local Institute for Geothermal Studies suspended all Dalal expeditions. His funeral took place quietly outside Helsinki, attended by close family and colleagues. His ashes were scattered near the family's summer cabin, where he had spent much of his childhood. It was October 16, 2015. Warm light hit Zion's sandstone cliffs as autumn wind kicked up dust along the Angel's Landing Trail. Dana Ruiz, a 29-year-old substitute teacher from Albuquerque, tightened her red jacket and checked her water bottle one final time. A solo hike meant for peace and clarity would end as one of Zion's most heartbreaking tragedies. Dana wasn't seeking thrills. After battling clinical depression for over a year, hiking had become her therapy, one foot in front of the other, ascending literal peaks while rebuilding emotional stability. This solo road trip through Utah's national parks was her reward. 5 days of open roads, trailheads, and tent nights. She researched every route obsessively, reading warnings about exposure with the cautious nature friends knew well. Angel's Landing combines breathtaking views with deadly exposure, where hikers navigate a narrow rock spine just feet wide with 1,000-foot drop-offs on both sides, relying on chains bolted into cliff faces, where one slip means certain death on the rocks below. The trail's final half-mile is infamous among park rangers for its body count. That morning, Dana left her campsite early, hoping to summit before crowds thickened. She pressed on despite obvious nerves, pausing frequently to let others pass. Several hikers remembered her, quiet, polite, clearly nervous, but not panicked. One couple recalled seeing her pause near a choke point, steadying her breath and quietly telling herself she could do it. The trouble began at a particularly narrow section before the final ascent. A slow-moving group ahead clogged the trail, creating a dangerous bottleneck. Instead of waiting, Dana stepped slightly downslope to maneuver around them. The sandstone ledge, polished smooth by years of boots, gave way beneath her foot. In that moment, there was no room for a second mistake. The sandstone crumbled under her trailing foot, sending her weight off center. Dana lurched sideways, one arm swinging out toward the chain but coming up short by inches. Her boots scraped desperately for traction on the slick rock, but the slope offered nothing. Witnesses said her body rotated mid-fall, back first, before she struck a ledge, bounced once, and continued tumbling. Her scream was brief, cut off by impact. By the time silence returned, she was already gone from view. Her body was located 200 feet below on a steep talus slope. The park staff called for help, but the recovery required helicopter assistance and only occurred the following morning due to winds and limited daylight. Rangers temporarily closed the chained section that weekend. Her funeral in Albuquerque was held at the school gymnasium where she taught. Dana's death prompted immediate safety improvements. Zion increased signage and released guidance on high-traffic hazard zones. Discussions began about timed entry permits for Angel's Landing, implemented years later. Thanks for watching. If these real-life accounts of preparation, misjudgment, and unforgiving terrain resonate with you, click here for more.